Are you familiar with composting? It's the practice of mixing yard waste with kitchen waste and letting it all decompose into a nutrient-rich soil additive that is so good for your garden. This episode of Homegrown, Your Backyard Garden podcast has been inspired by Learn About Composting Day, which is observed every year on May 29th. So let's dig in and learn about composting. Welcome to Homegrown, Your Backyard Garden podcast. I'm your host, Kathy Rogers, and together we'll explore growing a successful vegetable garden no matter where you live. I've been gardening for a lot of years, in a lot of places. My husband, who we fondly refer to as the Chief, is now retired from the Navy, which means that we moved around a lot during the 2 decades that he was in the service. A lot. I stopped counting when we moved for the 30th time, and I don't even know the grand total at this point. Of course, I couldn't garden in every place we lived. Many of those homes were apartments. Some were rented houses. Sometimes we only lived in a place over the fall and winter months. And other times we knew we'd be moving in the summer, so why even bother? But I did grow things whenever I could, even if it was just a houseplant. I've gardened on the West Coast, the Northeast, the Upper Midwest, the Central States, and finally, here in Oklahoma. The so-called black swamp of southern Michigan had the best soil, loose and black and absolutely beautiful, and I think that Oklahoma's red clay is about the worst I've tried to grow things in. So I've gardened with varying degrees of success over the years. But my best gardens happened after I learned how to compost, and I regret that it took me so long to get started. I'm a big cheerleader now for composting, and I've sure done my part to convert people and teach them how to get started. Let's see if I can inspire you too. While I'm giving you an overview of the benefits of composting and the basics to get started, you'll find more information, my tips and tricks, plus a crazy long list of items you can add to your compost pile in my ebook, The Down to Earth Guide to Composting, which is on sale through June 3rd for 50% off. You'll find the link to the book and the coupon code in the episode description. A compost pile is made up of vegetation, kitchen waste, dried wood products like paper and sawdust, and so much more. Layered together and allowed to decay, this pile will rot down into rich organic material to add to your garden. Why should you bother with composting? It might sound like a lot of work, and you can go buy bags of compost at the garden center, right? Well, if you know me at all, you know that I much prefer to make things myself. Partly because it saves money, but also because of the satisfaction of making things, even compost, from scratch. Plus, I've bought those bags of compost, and they range from so-so to pretty darn awful. I can make better compost myself, and I know what went into it, and I know it doesn't contain grass clippings from someone's lawn that was treated with weed killer and pesticides, or some other stuff that I don't want to use in my garden. I have control over what goes into my compost pile. I admit I'm not the purist that some composters are, but I'm comfortable with my own standards, what I do add to my compost, and what I've decided not to include. But let's talk about the benefits of composting. First, composting is good for your garden. Oh my goodness, it is so good for your garden. Believe it or not, increasing the organic matter in your soil by just 5% will quadruple the soil's capacity to hold water. And that's what compost is, organic matter. Grass clippings, straw, sawdust, weeds, fruit peels, apple cores, corn cobs, all that organic matter is decomposed into nutrient-rich finished compost, which is also called humus. Adding that compost to your soil changes the soil's texture. Sandy soil can do a better job of holding water and nutrients, and clay soil is loosened so that plant roots can grow, spread, and become established, and water can drain properly. It's kind of amazing that one thing can change both kinds of problem soil. Nutrients are less likely to wash out of soil that holds moisture, and soil is less likely to erode. Healthy soil contains air, moisture, and nutrients, and adding compost to the soil will encourage this healthy structure. Worms, insects, and good bacteria are able to live in the soil and keep it well aerated. So compost brings diverse life to the soil, and then it feeds those life forms. That awful red clay soil that I deal with now, it has changed immensely over the years since I've been adding compost. I've even noticed that the soil underneath my compost pile has improved. I can stick a shovel easily down into that soil, while 10 feet away it's like concrete. I purposely moved my compost pile's location around in my garden so that the soil underneath has been improved on purpose and with no extra work from me. Healthy soil also helps your plants fight diseases and pests. Topping off your garden with a couple of inches of compost around your plants is also helpful. First, it insulates your plants' roots, keeping them cooler when it's hot and warmer when it's a bit chilly. And as it rains or as you water your garden, the nutrients in your compost will filter down to your plants' roots and help to feed them. I'd be composting just for the healthy soil, even without the rest of the benefits that we're going to talk about. I finally became a successful gardener after I began composting, and you can too. Second, composting is good for your wallet, because adding compost to soil changes its texture. Whether you're starting with sandy soil or dense clay, composting can reduce the time you need to spend watering your garden. And if you live in a town where you pay for your water usage, using less water can mean a significant savings over the growing season. You'll also save money on chemical fertilizers and pesticides when your plants are growing in healthy, nutrient-rich soil. Not to mention the fact that compost provides natural plant food, so you're not adding chemicals to your food garden, and that's important to me. You'll also save money because you won't need to buy more bagged soil and compost each year. Soil settles over time, and in the spring or in the fall, most gardeners add more soil and or compost to bring the level back up, especially in raised beds and containers. Using homemade compost saves you money here, too, and adds nutrients and organic matter to your soil. Third, composting is good for you. Gardening, including composting, is great exercise and is so good for your health. Not only are you getting fresh air and exercise, you will also reap the benefits of healthy organic fruits and vegetables in your diet. Plus, studies show that dirt contains a natural antidepressant, whose name I can't even begin to pronounce, but I'll include it in the description. This form of bacteria seems to stimulate the production of serotonin, which makes you feel relaxed and happy. The lack of serotonin is linked to depression and anxiety. Gardeners and composters are more likely than most other people to come into contact with this soil bacteria by breathing it in and by handling the soil. You see, playing in the dirt is good for you. It's no wonder so many gardeners say that their garden is their happy place, right? WebMD estimates that moderate yard work, such as pulling weeds, raking leaves, and mowing the lawn, can burn up to 400 calories per hour. And these activities produce materials for your compost pile: weeds, grass clippings, and leaves. Heavier yard work, such as landscaping and hauling dirt, can burn as much as 600 calories per hour. I think turning a compost pile is right up there too. Physical activity is good for us. It helps us stay in shape, sleep better, digest our food, and even gives us a chance to think without distraction. And fourth, composting reduces the amount of waste that goes into our landfills. According to the Environmental Protection Agency, yard waste makes up about 13% of the total waste added to our landfills, and another 20% of landfill contents is food waste. By composting these items, our total amount of waste in landfills is significantly reduced. We could lower the amount of land that is dedicated to landfill use by up to 33%. When food waste and yard waste are buried in a landfill, it decays in an anaerobic method, which means without air. This method produces methane gas, which is one of the most potent and harmful greenhouse gases. In contrast, a compost pile uses aerobic decomposition, a process of decay in the presence of air. Done correctly, a compost pile doesn't smell, isn't slimy, and doesn't attract flies. It produces a rich, crumbly material that resembles soil and smells earthy and good, and can be used in our gardens and flower beds. Recycling at its best. Now that you know how compost can benefit you, your wallet, and your health, let's see how easy it is to get started. While the gardening industry would like you to purchase a compost tumbler, it isn't necessary. My recommendation is to compost right on the ground, in a compost pile, at least at first. Not only is this method totally free, it's the best way to become familiar with the process of composting. The only tool you'll need, seriously, is a shovel or a pitchfork. I do recommend purchasing a compost thermometer, but honestly I composted for decades without one. Simply choose a spot in your garden or yard and get started. While a full sun location is great, it isn't completely necessary. Composting is as simple as layering nitrogen-rich materials, which are referred to as greens, with carbon-rich materials, which are called browns. The only other ingredients you need are water and air. Collecting green materials is easy in the summer. Grass clippings from mowing the yard, weeds pulled from your garden, fruit and vegetable waste such as banana peels, apple cores, carrot peels, and coffee grounds. These items are rich in nitrogen. Brown materials are rich in carbon and include dead or dry leaves, wood chips, sawdust, shredded paper, coffee filters, pine needles, twigs, eggshells, and dead plants such as hay and straw. Now, although I said this is a simple process of layering browns and greens, and it's true, there is a trick to it. Greens tend to be wetter than browns, so you need more browns than greens to balance out the process and prevent a slimy, stinky mess. How much more? That's the million-dollar question. My answer to that question is, it depends. It depends on how much moisture is in your green materials. Newly mowed grass clippings contain a lot of moisture and a lot of nitrogen, so they need more browns to sort of soak up that moisture. Compare that to a pile of leafy twigs that you pruned from a hedge. They don't need as much carbon because those leaves aren't as wet. This is one of the reasons I suggest composting on the ground, because it's easier to get a feel for how much nitrogen and carbon you need. Experience is the best teacher, and this is hands-on experience. If you have an enclosure or a tumbler, it's harder to see what's going on inside. After layering your greens and browns, the middle of that pile will begin to heat up. This is where the compost thermometer comes in handy, so you can keep an eye on the temperature. After a few days, the temperature will drop, and it's time to turn the pile. You can use a shovel or a pitchfork to mix it all up. This adds more air, one of those 4 required ingredients that are needed for decomposition. You'll also be able to see if your compost needs additional moisture. You can add water with your hose as you turn the pile. Remember how I said it's easier to learn to compost by having a pile right on the ground? It's easier to turn the pile, but it's also easier to keep an eye on whether or not your pile needs more water, or less water, or more browns, or more greens. It's more of a hands-on experience. If your compost pile is smelly and slimy, you need more carbon, or browns. If nothing is happening inside your compost pile, if it looks exactly like it did when you first started it and it hasn't heated up at all, you probably need more greens or more moisture. And let me tell you, grass clippings are a powerhouse when it comes to composting. They really get things going. You can compost successfully using nothing but grass clippings and fallen leaves from last autumn. After you mix up the pile, the temperature will climb again. When the temperature drops, it's time to turn it again. Eventually, the temperature in the middle of your compost pile will stay cooler even after you've mixed it up. And this is when it's time to let your compost rest and mature. This will soon be finished compost. What if you don't have a compost thermometer? I composted for years without one. I couldn't know how hot it was inside or when the temperature started to drop, so I just turned it every weekend. And I could tell how it was doing by how it looked inside. The inside of my compost pile was often too hot to touch, so I knew it was working well. Don't forget that my ebook, The Down-to-Earth Guide to Composting, is on sale at half price in honor of Learn About Composting Day. While this episode gives you a quick overview of composting, you'll find more information, tips, and tricks in the book. You'll also find troubleshooting tips for when your compost pile just isn't balanced correctly, and a list of what you cannot add to your compost pile. It's a treasure trove of information that we just don't have time for here. You'll find the link in the description with the coupon code so you can save that 50%. So, how do you use finished compost? You can mix it with your garden soil to add nutrients and to improve the soil's texture. Use compost on top of the soil during the growing season as mulch to help hold moisture in the soil. Top off your raised beds with compost before planting again in the spring. Add it to your potted plants to give them a boost. Sift out the larger pieces so you're left with a fine texture and start your seedlings in it in the spring. These are just a few of the ways you can use your finished compost. Now you know how to recycle garden waste, kitchen waste, office waste, and barn waste into something that's great for your garden, waste management at its best. And you had a great cardio workout every time you turned your compost pile without having to pay for a gym membership. Have I convinced you too? Be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you won't miss a single episode. Share it with your friends too. As always, you'll find the link to the transcript in the description. You'll find even more information on my website, oakhillhomestead.com, on Facebook at Oak Hill Homestead, and on Instagram at Oak Hill Homestead. You'll find those links in this episode's description. Thank you for tuning in today, and I'll see you here next time on Homegrown, your backyard garden podcast.